I've always been a sucker for a good deal, especially when it comes to travel. So when I found an Airbnb near Lake Tahoe that looked like something straight out of a luxury travel magazine but was listed at a ridiculously low price, I didn't think twice. It had a lake view, a private hot tub, a fully stocked game room, and even a vintage movie projector. The kind of place that makes you wonder if the owner forgot a zero at the end of the price. But I wasn't about to question my luck. I booked it for the long weekend, roping in my friends Jake, Olivia, and Ben to split the cost. We were all in our early 20s, craving an escape from our boring day jobs and college stress, so it felt like the perfect getaway. The host, an older woman named Mrs. Whitmore, sent me a message right after the booking. "Welcome. Just a small request. Please don't open the basement door. Have a wonderful stay." That was weird, but whatever. Maybe it was a storage space or a utility room. I wasn't going to let something like that ruin a weekend in what felt like a once-in-a-lifetime rental. We packed up, hit the road, and reached the house just before sunset. And that's when the first weird thing happened. The house looked exactly like the photos. Almost too exactly. Like no one had lived in it, touched it, or even breathed in it since the pictures were taken. And the front door, already unlocked. I hesitated for a second before pushing it open. Inside, the air smelled like old books and damp wood. Everything was set up perfectly. The kitchen was spotless, the beds were made like a hotel, and the TV was already on the home screen as if someone had been watching it before we arrived. Ben made a joke about how it felt staged, like a showroom. But Jake, always the adventurer, grabbed a beer from the fridge and laughed. "Dude, who cares? This place is awesome." We threw our bags down and explored. Upstairs, 3 bedrooms, all clean and tidy. Downstairs, the game room, exactly as advertised, with pinball machines, a pool table, and a wall of vintage arcade games. And then, at the end of the hall, was the basement door. It had 3 locks on it, 1 deadbolt, 1 latch, 1 padlock. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "That's excessive." "Maybe she's just paranoid about people stealing her stuff," I said, trying to brush it off. But I won't lie. Something about that door didn't feel right. That night, after a few drinks, we settled into the living room to watch a movie. Halfway through, I noticed something strange. One of the security cameras outside was turned toward us. It was an old, yellowed camera attached to the corner of the porch. The weird thing? I could have sworn it was facing away from the house when we arrived. I pointed it out to Jake, but he shrugged. Maybe the wind moved it. That didn't sit right with me. But then, we heard a noise. A soft creaking, like a door slowly opening. We all turned to look. The basement door was slightly open. Nope, nope, nope. Olivia stood up. "Tell me one of you unlocked that." No one had. I walked toward it, pushing it open just a little more. The staircase disappeared into pure darkness. And then we heard it. A whisper coming from below. A whisper that said my name. I froze. I knew I had to be imagining it. The wind, the house settling, something logical. But hearing my own name come from the basement, that was different. Jake laughed nervously. "All right, who's messing with us?" None of us answered. Olivia took a step back. "Just close it. I don't care what's down there. I'm not about to be in a horror movie tonight." I slammed the door shut, locking every single bolt and latch. There. Problem solved. We tried to shake it off, but the mood had shifted. The house, once exciting, now felt wrong. Like we weren't supposed to be there. Ben decided to check the Airbnb listing again. Maybe there were reviews about weird stuff happening here. But when he pulled up the app, his face went pale. "It's gone." "What do you mean, gone?" I asked. "I mean, the listing doesn't exist anymore. It's just not there." None of us spoke. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The house creaked in response. Something about the air felt heavier now, like the walls were closing in. "Guys?" Olivia's voice was barely above a whisper. She was staring at the security camera feed on the living room TV. And that's when we saw it. One of the outdoor cameras showed the front porch. Standing there, motionless, was Mrs. Whitmore. She wasn't knocking. She wasn't trying to come in. She was just standing there staring at the door. And then she smiled. Before we could react, the screen glitched out, turning to static. The lights flickered, and suddenly, the power went out. The house was pitch black. "Nobody move," I whispered. I could feel my own pulse pounding in my ears. Ben turned on his phone flashlight, but the moment he did, thud. Something slammed against the basement door from the inside. Thud, thud, thud. The sound of something heavy, or someone, throwing itself against the wood. Olivia grabbed my arm. "We need to go, now!" Jake rushed to the front door, twisting the knob, but it wouldn't budge. "It's locked," he shouted. "It won't open." Ben ran to the windows, nailed shut, every exit sealed. The basement door gave another violent shake. And then the whispers started again. Not one voice, many. A chorus of distorted murmurs rising from the basement like a tide. I fumbled with my phone, trying to call for help. No signal. And then, on the security camera screen, a single frame flickered back to life. It wasn't Mrs. Whitmore anymore. It was the basement door, and it was wide open. Something was coming up the stairs. We ran. Didn't matter where, just away from the basement door. The whispers grew louder, turning into a low, guttural hum that made my skin crawl. My phone light flickered as I sprinted down the hallway, Ben right behind me, Olivia sobbing, Jake cursing under his breath. The front door still wouldn't open. The windows were still sealed shut. And then, the air changed. The house went dead silent. Not just quiet, silent. No wind, no footsteps, no whispers. Like the entire world had just stopped. Then we heard it. A slow creak. The sound of the basement steps shifting under weight. Someone or something was coming up. I turned. My breath caught in my throat. The hallway stretched out like a tunnel, impossibly long now, the walls bending inward like the house was twisting around us. And then, at the very end, a figure emerged. Tall, unnaturally thin, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones. Its face was almost human. Almost. But its mouth, God, its mouth. Too wide, grinning. A black pit of jagged teeth. And its eyes, milky white, empty, but locked right onto me. I staggered backward, my mind screaming at my body to move, but I was frozen. Jake grabbed me, yanking me toward the stairs. "Move!" he shouted. Ben threw a chair against the creature. It shattered like glass, but the thing didn't even flinch. It tilted its head. And then, it spoke. In Mrs. Whitmore's voice. "You shouldn't have opened the door." The lights blasted back on, flooding the room with a blinding white glow. And just like that, the house was empty, no creature, no whispers, just the four of us standing there shaking. The front door swung open on its own. Without a word, we bolted. We drove all night without stopping. By morning, we pulled into a gas station, still too shaken to speak. Olivia grabbed my phone and checked the Airbnb listing again. Still gone. We searched for the house on Google Maps. It wasn't there. No record of the address. No Mrs. Whitmore. Nothing. Like it had never existed. Ben was the first to break the silence. So, did we all just imagine that? None of us answered. But deep down we knew the truth. That house, whatever it was, had been waiting for us. And next time, it wouldn't let us leave. I had always been the kind of person who enjoyed solo trips. Something about being alone in a new place, away from the noise of everyday life, felt freeing. This time, I wanted a weekend escape, just a few days to disconnect. Scrolling through Airbnb, I found a secluded cabin in Tahoe City, California. It had amazing reviews, a cozy interior, and was right near the lake. The owner had multiple listings, all in the same area, but this particular cabin felt perfect. I booked it instantly. A month later, I landed in Reno, picked up my rental car, and started the hour-long drive to the cabin. By the time I got there, it was past 11 p.m., the air crisp with that eerie stillness only found in isolated places. As I pulled into the gravel driveway, I noticed something odd. The cabin next door was supposed to be empty, but a faint light flickered inside. I sat in the car for a moment staring at it, before convincing myself it was just the reflection of my headlights. Shaking it off, I grabbed my bags and walked up to the front door. That's when I felt it, that undeniable sensation of being watched. Turning my head slightly, I glanced at the neighboring cabin. There, behind the window, someone was staring at me. Their face was barely visible in the dim light, but I could make out a silhouette. I froze. Then, just as quickly as I saw it, the figure stepped back into the darkness. I tried to laugh it off. Probably just some other guest, right? But the listing said that place was vacant. I took a deep breath, went inside, and locked the door behind me. The cabin was exactly like the pictures, warm, rustic, and perfectly silent. I threw my bag onto the couch, kicked off my shoes, and headed straight for the shower. The sound of running water drowned out my thoughts, and for the first time that night, I felt like I could finally relax. Then, the doorbell rang. I froze mid-rinse. Who the hell would be visiting me this late at night? I ignored it, figuring if it was important, they'd knock again. But they didn't. Just one ring, and then nothing. I stepped out, dried off quickly, and peeked through the peephole. No one was there. The driveway was empty. The porch was undisturbed. Still, something didn't sit right. I made sure all the doors were locked, closed the blinds, and climbed into bed. I must have been more exhausted than I thought because I slept straight through the night. When I woke up, sunlight was already streaming through the curtains. Relieved, I got dressed and headed into town for breakfast, trying to shake off the unease from the night before. But when I came back later that evening, just as the sun was setting, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. The same figure from last night was standing on my front porch. The second they saw me, they bolted, rushing back into the supposedly empty neighboring cabin. I stood frozen next to my car, my stomach twisting into knots. Who was that? And why were they watching me? I needed answers. I hesitated before getting out of the car. Every instinct in me screamed that something wasn't right. Whoever that was had been watching me since last night, and now they were standing on my porch. I forced myself to act normal, casually walking to the front door while keeping an eye on the neighboring cabin. Its curtains were now shut. I stepped inside and locked the door immediately. For the next hour, I kept checking the windows, expecting to see that figure return. But nothing happened. The silence only made it worse. Trying to distract myself, I set up my laptop in the kitchen and started working. But just as I was beginning to relax, something hit the back door. A small, sharp sound, like a pebble. I looked up. Another tap. Then another. Slowly, I stood and walked toward the glass door. The porch light barely illuminated the yard beyond it. I squinted into the darkness. At first, I saw nothing. Then, movement. A small, hunched figure standing just beyond the tree line. They bent down, picked something up, and hurled another small rock straight at the door. I stumbled back. My heart pounded in my chest. I yanked the door open and shouted, "Hey, get the hell out of here!" No response. They just stood there. I grabbed my phone, threatening to call the police. Still, they didn't move. But the second I took a step forward, they vanished into the trees. I locked the door, pulled all the blinds shut, and stood there for what felt like hours, waiting. But nothing else happened. Eventually, exhaustion won. I convinced myself it was just some local messing around, maybe a squatter from the empty cabin. Creepy, but not dangerous. I was wrong. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. At first, I didn't know why. Then, I heard it. Soft footsteps in the hallway. I wasn't alone. I shot up in bed, my pulse hammering. The footsteps stopped just outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, staring at the shadow beneath the doorframe. Then, the handle turned, slowly. I jumped out of bed and yanked the door open, just in time to see someone sprinting down the hall, barefoot. It was them, the same person from outside. They bolted toward the front door, flinging it open and disappearing into the night. I chased after them, stopping at the porch just in time to see them slipping back into the neighboring cabin. I slammed my own door shut, locked it, and immediately called the police. My hands were shaking as I explained everything. The strange figure, the rocks, the intrusion. They arrived within 20 minutes, knocking on the neighbor's cabin. No response. Then an officer turned to me and said something that made my stomach drop. "Sir, this cabin isn't rented out. The owner confirmed that no one should be staying here." I stood there, my stomach twisting into knots. No one was supposed to be staying there? The officer knocked again, harder this time. Still no answer. Finally, they decided to enter. One officer pushed the door open while the other kept his hand near his holster. I stayed on my porch, watching. Inside, the place looked abandoned. No furniture, no lights, nothing but dust and shadows. But then one of the officers muttered, "What the hell?" I took a cautious step closer. That's when I saw it. A mattress on the floor, blankets, empty food containers, and a phone plugged into the wall, still charging. Someone had been living there. Recently. The officers searched the place but found no one. The back door was unlocked, leading into the dense trees behind the property. Whoever it was, they had escaped into the woods. One of the officers sighed. Probably a squatter. We see this sometimes. A squatter. No, this wasn't just some random person looking for a place to sleep. They had been watching me. They had broken into my house, and they knew I was here. The police took a report and told me to call if anything else happened, but I wasn't planning on staying another night. Still, something inside me needed answers. Before leaving, I decided to do one last check of my Airbnb. I wanted to know how they got in. I searched the front door, locked. Windows, all secured. But then I checked the keypad lock on the back door. That's when I noticed something off. The screen had faint smudges, like it had been used recently. I hesitated, then typed 000 as a test. Denied. Then I tried 1234. Click. The door unlocked. My skin went cold. Whoever had been sneaking into my Airbnb knew the default codes. And if they knew the codes, that meant this wasn't the first time they had done this. I felt sick. How many other guests had been watched like this? How many had slept peacefully, unaware that someone was inside their house at night? I didn't waste another second. I packed my bags, threw them into the car, and got the hell out of there. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced at the neighboring cabin one last time. For a split second, I swear I saw a face in the window watching me leave. A few days later, I reported everything to Airbnb. A week after that, I checked the listing again. It was gone. Completely removed from the site. No explanation, no warnings. Just erased. Then, an email arrived in my inbox. No sender, no subject, just one sentence. You saw me. I don't know if I should have trusted my instincts that night. Looking back, I think I knew something was off the moment I stepped inside that house. But I was exhausted, running on caffeine and barely functioning after driving for nearly 10 hours straight. All I wanted was a place to crash for the night before finishing my trip the next morning. The Airbnb seemed perfect. A small cabin just off Highway 101 near Mendocino, California. Isolated, quiet, cheap. I barely even checked the listing. I just booked, grabbed the address, and followed the GPS. When I pulled up, the house looked fine. A little old, maybe, but nothing unusual. It was one of those single-story wooden houses surrounded by trees, with a long gravel driveway leading up to it. No neighbors in sight, which didn't bother me at first. I stepped out of my car, stretched my legs, and grabbed my backpack. The host had sent me a code for the lockbox, so I punched it in and let myself inside. That's when I noticed the smell. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was there. Stale, damp, with something else mixed in. Not exactly rotting, but decayed. Like an old basement that hadn't been aired out in years. I figured it was just mildew or maybe a dead animal under the house. Either way, I wasn't about to go investigating. I was too damn tired. I set my stuff down in the living room and took a quick look around. The cabin had a small kitchen, a bathroom, and 2 bedrooms. Both bedroom doors were slightly open, but I didn't bother checking them. Instead, I made my way to the couch, which looked worn but comfortable enough. Just as I pulled a blanket off the armrest, a loud thud echoed through the house. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't a creak or the house settling. It was a deep, heavy noise like something hitting the wall. I froze, listening. Nothing. I glanced at the bedroom doors, still open. The place was supposed to be empty. Shaking off the unease, I walked down the short hallway, peeking into both rooms. Empty. The windows were shut, and there was no sign that anyone had been in here. Still, the sound had been too loud to ignore. Something had made it. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe an old water pipe shifting. Either way, I wasn't about to start freaking out over some random noise in an empty house. I walked back to the couch, trying to convince myself it didn't matter. Whatever it was, I'd only be here for a few hours. Then I could leave and never think about this place again. I turned off the lights, lay down, and pulled the blanket over me. My body was exhausted, my mind barely functioning. As my breathing slowed, I felt myself drifting into sleep. And that's when I heard it again. Another thud. Loud. Hollow. Almost rhythmic. Like something knocking from inside the walls. I sat up, my pulse spiking. The sound had come from above me. I stared at the ceiling, my breath caught in my throat. The thud had been right above me. My mind started racing through possibilities. An animal in the attic, a branch hitting the roof. But the sound hadn't come from outside. It was inside the house. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and slowly stood up. The living room was dimly lit by the glow from my screen, casting long shadows across the floor. Everything was still. Quiet. Too quiet. I took a step forward and then stopped. That smell. It was stronger now, like something had been disturbed. I aimed the flashlight at the hallway, scanning the walls, the ceiling. That's when I saw it. A small square door in the ceiling near the end of the hallway. A pull-down attic entrance. I hadn't noticed it before. A pit formed in my stomach. I took another step closer. The hairs on my arms stood on end. Something about that little door felt wrong. The silence stretched. I waited. Nothing. I let out a breath and shook my head. I was being paranoid. Still, I wasn't about to open that attic. Whatever was up there, rat, raccoon, or otherwise, it wasn't my problem. I turned around, deciding I was done playing detective for the night. I needed to sleep. I climbed back onto the couch, wrapped myself in the blanket, and closed my eyes. Minutes passed. Maybe an hour. I drifted in and out of sleep. Then, kriak. My eyes shot open. That wasn't the house settling. That was wood shifting. I didn't move. I held my breath, listening. Then, another creak from the hallway. I gripped my phone, my fingers slick with sweat. I couldn't see the hallway from where I was lying, and I didn't want to look. Something was there, standing in the dark, watching. I felt it before I saw it. A slow, heavy exhale, right behind the couch. I whipped around, heart slamming against my ribs. Nothing. No one. The hallway was empty. But then I noticed it. The attic door. It was open. My stomach dropped. The attic door was wide open. A thin, retractable ladder now hung down into the hallway, its metal frame swaying slightly, as if someone had just climbed down. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. I wasn't alone. I forced myself to move, gripping my phone like a lifeline. My fingers hovered over the screen, ready to call 911, but then something caught my eye. The footprints. Faint, dark smudges on the wooden floor, leading from the attic ladder, toward the couch, toward me. My blood ran cold. Someone had been standing right behind me, watching, breathing. I had felt them. I staggered backward, my mind screaming at me to run, run, run. But then, something else made me freeze. A whisper, soft, almost playful, coming from above. I lifted my gaze, heart pounding. The attic door gaped open like a black hole in the ceiling. And then, movement. A shadow shifted inside the attic. My body moved before my brain could catch up. I bolted, straight for the front door. My hands fumbled with the lock. Why the hell wasn't it opening? My breath came in short, ragged gasps as I yanked the knob. Then behind me, thud. Something hit the floor. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see. The door finally gave way and I threw myself outside, nearly falling onto the porch. I didn't stop. I ran straight to my car, heart jackhammering against my ribs. From inside the house I heard footsteps, slow, steady, coming closer. I yanked the car door open and jumped inside, locking it behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the keys. Then, movement in the window. A face, pale, hollow eyes, pressed against the glass, staring at me. I didn't wait. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life. My tires kicked up gravel as I floored it down the driveway, not daring to look back. I drove straight to a gas station on the edge of town and called the police. They searched the house, found nothing. The attic was empty, except for a dirty mattress, scattered food wrappers, and a small, dusty camcorder. Inside the camera was a single video file. They played it back. It was footage of me, sleeping on the couch, and right behind me, a figure slowly creeping down from the attic, watching, standing over me for hours, just breathing. The police never found him. I never went back. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. That breath, right behind me. I should have known better. I wanted a quiet getaway, something different from my usual dull, flat surroundings. So I booked a last-minute Airbnb in a small town outside Telluride, Colorado. The place looked decent in the pictures. A cozy little cabin, surrounded by towering pine trees, just isolated enough to feel like an escape. The price was surprisingly cheap, but I figured it was just off-season. The drive was long. 10 hours of endless highways and winding mountain roads. By the time I arrived, the sun had already dipped behind the trees, casting the landscape into deep shadows. The town itself was unsettling. Barely more than a few scattered houses, a gas station, and a rundown general store. No street lights, just dim porch lights flickering in the cold. The cabin sat at the end of a long gravel road, hidden between the trees. It looked older than I expected, more weathered, like it had been abandoned for years. The porch light was already on, but the place was dead silent. No sign of neighbors, no sign of the host. The key was exactly where the host said it would be, under a rusty metal pot on the porch. I hesitated for a second before unlocking the door and stepping inside. The inside was small but functional. A single bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a living area with an old couch facing a fireplace filled with unburned logs. It smelled like dust and damp wood. As I set my bags down, I felt it for the first time, a strange prickling sensation on my neck, like someone was watching me. I turned toward the window. Darkness. The forest outside was pitch black. My own reflection stared back at me, slightly distorted in the old glass. I shook it off and went about settling in. By the time I got the fireplace going and grabbed a drink from the fridge, the uneasy feeling still hadn't left me. That's when I noticed something odd. The front door's deadbolt. It was scratched, like someone had tried to force it open. Not fresh scratches, but deep, worn grooves that had been there a long time. Probably just an old door, I told myself. Still, I double-checked that it was locked before sinking into the couch. That's when I heard it. Crunch. A soft sound from outside. Footsteps on gravel. I froze, my heartbeat spiking. The porch light wasn't bright enough to see much, but as I crept toward the window, I caught something, a shadow moving between the trees. I held my breath, waiting. Nothing. After a few seconds, I convinced myself I was just being paranoid. I had driven all day. My mind was playing tricks on me, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I must have dozed off on the couch because the next thing I knew, a sharp sound jolted me awake. Knock. I sat up fast, my heart hammering. The room was dark, the only light coming from the dying embers in the fireplace. Knock, knock. Someone was at the door. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. 12:03 a.m. Who the hell would be here at this hour? I tiptoed toward the door, trying to make as little noise as possible. The knocking had stopped, but I could hear something. Soft breathing. Swallowing hard, I peered through the peephole. Nothing. Just the porch, the gravel driveway, and the trees swaying in the wind. No sign of anyone. I exhaled, rubbing my face. Maybe it was the wind rattling the old wood. Maybe an animal. I was overthinking this. Just as I turned away, knock. A single deliberate knock. I spun back, adrenaline surging. My hand hovered over the doorknob, but I hesitated. If it was someone from the town, why wouldn't they say something? I grabbed my phone and typed out a message to the host. Me. Hey, is there supposed to be anyone else on the property? Someone knocked on my door. No response. I locked the deadbolt, backed away, and sat on the couch, gripping my phone like a lifeline. I told myself it was nothing, that it was just nerves. But I didn't sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I must have dozed off again. When I opened my eyes, the cabin was eerily silent. No wind, no creaking, just stillness. That's when I saw it. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. My eyes were still adjusting to the dark, but something was outside my window. A face, pressed against the glass. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. Couldn't blink. The figure didn't move either. It just stared, its pale face barely visible in the moonlight. Then, slowly, it backed away. I should have heard footsteps. I should have heard the crunch of gravel. But there was nothing. Just silence. My whole body was screaming at me to do something, but I was frozen. I sat there for what felt like hours, gripping my phone, staring at the window, waiting, but they never came back. At least that's what I thought. Then I heard it, a soft click. The front door. I didn't think. I just acted. Jumping to my feet, I grabbed my phone and bolted toward the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me. My breathing was ragged, my fingers fumbling to lock the flimsy latch. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Inside the cabin. I pressed my ear against the door, my pulse pounding in my ears. Whoever it was, they weren't in a hurry. They were toying with me. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it. 911, what's your emergency? My voice came out in a whisper. Someone's in my cabin, they got inside. A pause. Then, static. The call dropped. No signal. I felt like I was going to be sick. My eyes darted around the room, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. Nothing. I was trapped. Then, a voice. Faint, right outside my door. Don't talk to him. My stomach turned to ice. It was a text message from the host. I barely had time to process it before I heard the doorknob turning. No. 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 I braced against the door, my entire body trembling. The latch rattled, then stopped. Silence. I waited. My breath caught in my throat. Then footsteps, moving away. I held still, listening as they went down the hall out the front door and onto the gravel driveway. Then, a car starting. I didn't move for another 10 minutes, maybe longer. When I finally worked up the nerve to check, the front door was wide open, and in the middle of the floor, something that hadn't been there before. A key. I grabbed my stuff and ran. I drove straight to the police station 20 miles away, filed a report. No leads, no suspects. The host never responded to my texts. When I checked the listing later, it was gone. No trace of it ever existing. I don't know who was out there that night, or what they wanted. But I know one thing. I wasn't supposed to be in that cabin, and whoever was watching didn't want me to leave. This happened just a few weeks ago. I needed a break. Nothing major, just a quiet weekend to clear my head. So I booked an Airbnb, an old lakeside cabin near Lake Tahoe, California. It looked perfect in the pictures, isolated, surrounded by trees, right on the water. The reviews were good, though a few mentioned how eerie it felt at night. I didn't think much of it. The drive was long, but I arrived just before sunset. The place looked exactly as advertised, maybe a little more rundown, but still charming. As I stepped out of my car, the silence hit me. No distant traffic, no voices, just the occasional rustling of branches. It felt still. Unlocking the door, I noticed the inside was simple, rustic. A living room with an old fireplace, a tiny kitchen, and a single bedroom with a large window overlooking the lake. Everything seemed fine. Except for one thing. The bed looked like it hadn't been slept in for weeks. I shrugged it off. Maybe the last guest had only used the couch. That night, I settled in with a movie and a glass of wine, trying to enjoy the solitude. The wind outside made the old wooden swing creak, an eerie sound in the silence. Still, I ignored it, and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up feeling refreshed. I stepped outside with my coffee, enjoying the crisp air. That's when I saw them. Footprints. They weren't mine. I hadn't been outside yet. But there they were, circling the cabin. I walked closer, my stomach tightening. The prints were deep, fresh, leading from the tree line to my porch, then back into the woods. The snow around them was undisturbed, meaning whoever had made them had been there while I was asleep. I felt a chill, not from the cold, but from something else. I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe a hiker had wandered too close. Maybe an animal. But deep down I knew better. These were footprints. Human footprints. Still, I convinced myself to stay. Just one more night. By the afternoon, I had managed to shake off the unease. I told myself I was overreacting. There was no sign of forced entry, no missing belongings. Maybe someone had just been curious about the cabin. To distract myself, I decided to explore the lakefront. The water was dark and still, reflecting the overcast sky. Something about it felt off, like it was swallowing all sound. I took a few pictures, walked a bit, and returned to the cabin before sunset. As I reached the porch, I noticed something strange. The footprints from this morning, they were gone. Not covered by snow, not filled in, just gone, like they had never been there. I felt a sharp sense of dread creeping up my spine. Snow doesn't just erase footprints. Someone had done it. Someone had been out there while I was away. I locked the doors and checked the windows, trying to calm myself. The wind picked up outside, and that damn wooden swing creaked again. But this time, the sound wasn't in rhythm with the wind. Someone was sitting on it, a shadowed figure, barely visible through the dim light, rocking slowly back and forth. My heart pounded. I stood frozen, gripping my phone. But before I could even think of calling for help, the figure stopped moving. And then, it turned its head toward me. I backed away from the window, heart hammering in my chest. My breath felt too loud in the silence. What the hell was I supposed to do? I forced myself to peek again, just for a second. The swing was empty. I swallowed hard. Maybe I had imagined it. The anxiety, the isolation. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. That had to be it. I turned off all the lights, locked myself in the bedroom, and got into bed with my phone clutched tight in my hand. I checked the Airbnb app again, scrolling through the listing. That's when I noticed something I hadn't before: the reviews. Buried between the good ones were a handful of strange comments. Felt like I wasn't alone. Woke up to footprints in the snow, thought I was imagining things. Saw someone standing by the lake. When I looked back, they were gone. My stomach twisted. Then, at exactly midnight, my phone buzzed with a new text. Unknown number. Are you warm inside? I nearly dropped the phone. I hadn't given my number to anyone. And then, the worst part. From the crack of my bedroom door, I heard a floorboard creak. I stopped breathing. The floorboard had creaked inside the cabin. I hadn't moved. I hadn't made a sound. But someone was there. For a moment, I stayed frozen in bed, my phone clutched in my hands, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, slowly, I reached toward the lamp on the nightstand. My fingers trembled as I switched it on. The light flickered weakly, barely cutting through the dark. The room looked the same. The door was still closed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was just beyond it. I forced myself to get up, every nerve in my body screaming. I moved as quietly as I could, stepping toward the door, pressing my ear against the wood. Silence. And then, a whisper. Not words, not a voice I recognized. Just a soft, deliberate sound like someone breathing against the door. That was it. I wasn't staying. I grabbed my bag, yanked open the window, and climbed out into the freezing night. The second my feet hit the snow, I ran. My car was parked just a few yards away, but it felt like miles. I fumbled with the keys, my fingers numb and shaking. Just as I unlocked the door, I risked one last glance back at the cabin. The bedroom light was off. I had left it on. And standing just behind the curtain, barely visible in the darkness, was a tall figure staring at me. I tore the car door open, jumped inside, and slammed it shut. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the keys. The engine roared to life, the headlights cutting through the snow. That's when I saw it. The footprints, not just circling the cabin, leading away from it. And at the end of the trail, right in the middle of the road, was a set of footprints that simply stopped. Like whoever, or whatever, had been there had vanished into thin air. I didn't stick around to find out more. I sped out of there, not caring about the snow, not caring about anything except getting as far away as possible. I drove straight to a motel in the next town and didn't sleep the entire night. The next morning, I checked the Airbnb listing again. It was gone, completely removed from the site. No record of it ever existing. No host, no reviews, nothing. It was like I had imagined the whole thing, but I didn't. Because a week later, a package arrived at my apartment. No return address, no note. Just a single item inside, a Polaroid photo of the cabin. And in the window, the same window I had escaped through, stood a shadowy figure, watching, waiting. I booked the cabin on a whim. I had a long weekend off from work and wanted somewhere quiet to focus on writing. The listing was perfect. Rustic, secluded, fully renovated, with all modern amenities. It was deep in Black Rock Forest, New York, a place I had only heard about through hiking forums. The host, Harold, had great reviews, so I didn't think twice before confirming my stay. When I arrived, the sun was already setting behind the dense tree line. The road had been paved most of the way, but the last few miles were rough, barely more than a dirt path. The cabin itself was small but charming, a traditional wooden structure with a wraparound porch. It looked old but well maintained. The key was right where Harold said it would be, under the flower pot by the front door. I stepped inside, dropping my bag in the living room. The place was cozy, decorated in that classic mountain lodge style. Plaid blankets, wooden furniture, a few framed photos of the forest. Everything seemed normal, until I noticed the cameras. There were 2 small security cameras mounted on opposite corners of the porch, angled toward the front yard. That wasn't mentioned in the listing. Maybe Harold had installed them for security reasons, but it still felt weird. Then, as I checked my phone, a text from Harold popped up. "Enjoy your stay. If you hear anything strange at night, it's just the wind." I frowned. It was oddly specific. That was the first red flag. After unpacking, I made myself some dinner and settled on the couch. The Wi-Fi was surprisingly decent for a remote location, so I streamed a few videos on my laptop. At some point, I heard a soft creaking sound. It came from upstairs. I stared at the ceiling, listening. There was no second floor, just a small attic space. Maybe it was an animal, raccoons or squirrels. Nothing unusual for a forest cabin. Then, my phone buzzed, a motion alert from the porch camera. I clicked on the notification and my stomach tightened. The camera feed was dark, grainy, but something moved at the edge of the frame. A figure standing just beyond the porch steps. I sat up, trying to see through the front window, but the porch light wasn't bright enough. The figure was gone. I replayed the footage. There it was, a shadowy shape standing perfectly still at the edge of the porch. Then, just as the motion alert ended, it took a step forward. I locked the front door. That was red flag number 2. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe a deer, maybe a glitch in the camera. But the unease settled deep in my chest. I turned off the lights and moved to the window, peeking through the curtain. Nothing. The trees swayed gently under the wind. The porch was empty, and my truck sat undisturbed in the driveway. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Then at exactly 2:37 a.m., I woke up to a sound. A metallic clinking, like someone jiggling a doorknob. I froze, holding my breath. The noise came from the back door. I reached for my phone, pulling up the camera feed. The porch was still empty. But the back camera? It was offline. My mind raced. Maybe the Wi-Fi was cutting out. Maybe a knock. Not a regular knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Then a voice. "Hey, I think I need some help." My heart nearly stopped. The voice was low, almost casual, like whoever it was wasn't actually in distress, just playing the part. I stayed silent, barely breathing. A few seconds passed. Then, "I saw you go inside earlier." My stomach dropped. That was red flag number 3. I stayed perfectly still, hoping whoever was out there would leave. But then, footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving along the side of the cabin, toward the kitchen window. My eyes flicked to the small half window above the sink. It was shut, but as I stared, I noticed something strange. The lock was missing. There were holes where screws used to be, paint chipped around the edges, like someone had removed it, on purpose. My breath caught in my throat. I grabbed my flashlight and crept to the kitchen. The footsteps stopped just as I got there. I waited. 10 seconds, 20, nothing. I reached for the window, pressing against the glass to make sure it was sealed. That's when I saw it, the smudged outline of a handprint on the outside. A cold wave of fear washed over me. Something told me that if I hadn't noticed that lock, if I hadn't checked that window, it would have been open. I backed away slowly, heart hammering against my ribs. And then from above me, a single slow creak. I snapped my head up. The attic door. It was slightly open. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The attic door was cracked open, just enough to see the darkness beyond. My skin prickled as I realized something. I never heard it open. For a full minute, I stood frozen in place, listening. Nothing, no movement, no breathing, just silence. Then, a footstep, a slow, deliberate step from inside the attic. That was enough. I bolted for the door, grabbing my keys from the table. My hands shook as I fumbled with the lock. Just as I swung the door open, I heard something move down the attic steps. Not fast, not running, just moving, like it knew I had nowhere to go. I sprinted to my truck, yanking the door open and jumping in. My fingers mashed the ignition button. Nothing. The engine wouldn't start. That's when I saw him. Standing on the porch, just beyond the glow of my headlights, was a man. Tall, pale, wearing ripped clothes and no shoes. His face was shadowed, but I could feel his eyes on me. He raised one hand and dangled something between his fingers. My truck's distributor cap. That's why it wouldn't start. My stomach twisted. He had planned this. He had been inside before I even arrived. I had one chance. I shoved the truck into neutral and let it roll down the sloped driveway. It picked up speed as I gripped the wheel, heart hammering. The headlights flickered over the porch, but he was gone. I didn't stop, didn't look back, just kept rolling until I was far enough down the hill to restart the engine. By the time I reached the highway, my phone vibrated. A text from Harold. "You left early. Everything all right?" I didn't respond. I just kept driving. A week later, I checked the Airbnb listing. It was gone like it had never existed.